It's actually really super important to have a diverse workforce, but actually where we should start is looking at the data, right? Let's take a really objective approach to this. And if you look at the data and if you look at the research, it all tells us diverse workforces perform better, right? So the Wall Street Journal, Deloitte, Burson, Aon, I can list a whole bunch of research and data that all points towards diverse teams perform better. Now that's the key thing. What does that perform better mean? It actually means delivering better organizational results. So when we think about that, that's the skin in the game for everybody. And that goes from the board to individual contributors, to people managers, to managers of managers, and to stakeholders, but also to us as employees within organizations. So it has such an cumulative, knock-on positive effect and can actually help you perform better as an organization. The key thing organizations need to do and that's a big word, if you really want to do it properly, is to move away from targets. Now targets sometimes help for sure, but what you've got to think about is how you move away from targets and move into culture, and how you move into the wider organization. Now, of course, culture is driven by leadership and values and ethos. So how do you embed DE&I within culture, within leadership, and within the organization's ethos? Targets will be there for certain reasons, but it's the cultural organizational element that's really important. So that's the key thing to think about. And then we go back to data, right? What's your starting point? And every organization has a different starting point. And within your organization, you will have divisions and different teams, and there'll be subcultures. So you've got to start reflecting and understanding where you are based on your own data. And then you've got to start to look at that particular data from an outside-in perspective and an inside-out perspective as well. But you've got to get that data, because if you don't have that data, you have no idea what your starting point is. But again, objective data will give you a really good understanding of where are we today, what's that snapshot, where are we good, where are we not so good, and what do I do next? And that data, of course, comes across a number of different facets. Internal, external, and expert data from us at Aon, right, to really help you understand what to do next. I think it's really important to start with the outcome in mind and try and work out what you'd like to achieve. And we've got to remember to take that movement away from DE&I targets and look to embed DE&I into organizational strategy, culture, leadership, and organizational ethos, right? No easy challenge, but that's actually the movement and journey that I would recommend, and Aon would recommend that organizations go on. Then if we start to think about that, the methodology here, well actually you've got to take a baseline. Where are we today? Right, get the data, what does that mean, and how can we monitor progress aligned to that? You've got to look at talent, right? You've got to think about talent mobility, you've got to think about your talent pipelines, and that has never been more critical. We speak to a number of recruiters and a number of people in talent, but also business leaders, and the talent pools are very challenging today. It's a candidate-driven market, that will not change. You've also then got to think about accountability. Ultimately, who is accountable and who's going to be held responsible for driving DE&I forward, right? And moving the dial in the right direction. And then you've got to make sure that you think about, okay, what is the data telling us? Where are we now? Where do we want to go? What are our key priorities? What actions will we take to move that forward? And then monitor that again in terms of where we're going next. You start with the data, you get experts to come in to make sure that your house is in order, and then you can understand what's going on, and actually you can decide what to do next. So I think they're the key critical elements that business leaders, people leaders, and individuals inside and outside of the organisation should be thinking about. There's actually loads of great examples where Aon have made a difference, but let me pick one where we actually started to do a DE&I audit around an early careers programme. So this was for a nationwide house builder, and again, very much so on the board's agenda. They have some fantastic programs that have won accolades and well respected within their industry. But they took a bit of a step back and were like, actually, how good are our programs, right? When it comes to DE&I, right? How do we know, and how do we actually look at the data we have internally and look at the data in the external marketplace and look at the data that we have as Aon. So we went through a really interesting program with them to actually look at that data. And we went really deep internally, so we did a number of stakeholder interviews, right? And we talked to even the CEO, but people that had early careers, people reporting to them, so the line manager. But we also spoke to current participants, past participants, right? What's their opinion? Give us that rich data. You combine that with then the market-led insight data we got, publicly available in the public domain. We went deep and we got lots of information but then you combine that with the expert data we have within Aon, really rich database data. You combine those three different data sets together, that's where you get real impact and real powerful outcomes. And the outcome of that is quite simple, is where are you aligned to best practice in terms of the traffic light system, red, amber, green, and lots of potential recommendations, but we boil that down across several areas. Remember, we're reviewing the end-to-end holistic program, from attraction to recruitment and selection, all the way through to onboarding and development, rotation program, not rotation program, length of program, what happens when you get off-boarded from an early careers program, right? Sometimes people leave the organization, sometimes they go into a permanent role. Where do they go? What happens? And what happens 2 years after that? Because that's where the DE&I element can sometimes get a bit fuzzy. So we looked at that end-to-end holistic perspective through those broad three different elements of data sets, and then come up with clear recommendations, 14 clear recommendations on what to do next to move the dial in the right direction around DE&I. So you're taking something good and you're working really hard and really sensibly with data to make it better. Benefit to the organization is actually they can shout louder and be prouder about what they're doing, about having a DE&I embedded ethos to their entire program. Great for candidates, great for society. It's a real benefit for everybody.